All right, I think we're live. Let's give it one more minute and we'll get started. And I mean, DJ, feel free to share your screen or and share anything that you want to share. Yep, so we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll get started. I'll just sort of kick things off and I'll turn things over to you, DJ. We are excited to have DJ for our next tutorial session on GitLab Omnibus. I guess I'll turn things over to you, and then give us a quick overview of what GitLab Omnibus is, I guess, for new contributors that are not familiar with it, and where you need help from community contributors. So.
Yeah, sure. So I'm DJ Mountney. I'm one of the distribution engineers here at GitLab, and one of the maintainers here on the Omnibus GitLab project. So today I just wanted to kind of give an intro to the Omnibus and contributing to it. We have some pretty extensive architectural and contributing docs in here, but I wanted to give kind of an intro to the project, a quick start to the way we've laid out the file system here in the project to get contributors kind of a quick start into it, and then point out where that further information is and where we're looking for contributions. So just to kind of give you some background on the Omnibus GitLab project, if you're not familiar with it, this is our repository responsible for packaging most of the GitLab components into a single installer. Most anything that GitLab needs to run, whether that be Ruby, Git, Postgres, Nginx, Prometheus, all of those, and a bunch more, are all compiled here along with the GitLab source code for the various GitLab components. And they're all put into one installer, a deb or RPM package that people can install on their machine. And then we build this project for every operating we support. So this includes most of the GitLab services. The few things that aren't included here are GitLab Runner, which have their own packaging process, and the Meltano project right now is separate as well. But almost everything else, almost every other project we have going at GitLab is somehow compiled into this project and released. And the way we do that here in this project is we use something called Omnibus, which is a piece of software that builds packages made by Opscodes, the team who makes Chef. So we use that. So this repository is really just a project manifest for the Omnibus builder software, which then we use to build the packages. So I wanted to just kind of give a quick start first into the folder structure of this project as a way to kind of give an easy way to jump in to know if you're wanting to make a change, what's important and what's not. So right here from the top of the repository, for contributors, the main two folders that are interesting are the config folder, which is where all of that project manifest for Omnibus lives, and then the files folder, which I'll get to later. Most of the rest is things like docs, the tests, or things related to us running the tests here in our GitLab CI. So the main folders are files and config. So if we just jump into the config folder, we have a projects folder. So this config folder, this is a layout dictated by the Omnibus software for defining a project that you're going to package into a deb or RPM, and then a list of dependencies as software that package depends on and will include in itself. So if we jump in, we have the GitLab project, and it defines things like its actual package name, what packages it replaces or conflicts with, maintainer, the things you expect to see in the package metadata on a deb or RPM, and then all the dependent software that's included in the package. So this is kind of the metadata file. We don't expect to require many contributions there, but it just gives a good idea of where the code kind of starts off when it's building. So it starts by the Omnibus software by building using this project manifest. And then for all those dependencies listed, how they are built are defined in all these files. So we have a few dependencies, as you can see. But if we jump into, let's say we'll look at the Ruby one, for example, you can see it itself has a few software dependencies also found in that same folder. And we actually go through and figure out what flags we need to set for the configuration of, for compiling it. So we end up building a configuration command and eventually, ultimately, running the configure and running the make to build Ruby. So that's a quick example of Ruby. I'll just jump into the main GitLab example as well. So the GitLab Rails project is the one where we actually build the GitLab source code. So it, just like the Ruby one, I didn't mention it, but it ends up defining where the code lives, and then it bundle installs all the gems that GitLab needs to run. So rather than compiling, because this is a Ruby project, instead has to do the work of installing all the dependencies, the gem dependencies, and preparing the source code for a more production-like release, and cleaning up some of the extra files that aren't needed, like the test folder and stuff like that. So that's as far as the folder structure for building and compiling the package. That's what that looks like. The secondary function that we use this project for, or the second big chunk of code that's included in this project, is in the files folder. And it's basically, the other thing we have in here is the configuration scripts for the scripts for configuring all of those components. So they're in the config directory, you saw us compiling them. But then once they're installed, there needs to be an easy way to configure all of them to work together. So everything in the config folder where we just saw runs at build time. So it's all compiled and built on our servers and packaged into the deb and RPM in like a complete state. And then everything within this files folder is more what then in the end runs on the node, on the place where you've installed the package. This is where, if you're familiar with our package, this is where you'll find everything that the GitLab CTL command does. So GitLab CTL is the command you run after you install for running reconfigure, which applies we have a config file, GitLab RB, that lets you set all of the settings, and then it takes reconfigure, applies that file to all of the various components. So in there you can specify, in that one file you can specify Nginx configuration, regular GitLab configuration, and things like that, and it takes it takes that and then actually creates the Nginx config file in the GitLab YAML config file, for example. So that CTL command, for example, is just a renamed version of Omnibus CTL, which is another piece of software provided in tangent with the Omnibus software from Opscode. For configuration, I'm just going to jump into the files folder here. We have additions to those CTL commands where we can specify our own custom commands. Those are things like PG upgrade, or the let's encrypt command. So we have a GitLab CTL let's encrypt renew, for example, as a command where you can manually trigger a let's encrypt certificate renewal. So any of the custom GitLab CTL commands that don't ship with the default Omnibus CTL, we've built out in there, and they get included there. And then the more interesting section is the GitLab cookbook. So in order to configure everything on the installed node, we use Chef, another project by Opscode, a much more popular one, a much more well-known one, and we use Chef recipes and cookbooks to accomplish that. In this case, it's using Chef Solo, and so there's no, unlike most Chef installations, it's not reaching out to any server to grab any information. There's no central Chef server or anything like that. It just all runs locally on the machine to configure the node. So I'll just give you a little look at that, and as kind of an example of a typical change we typically get from community contributors. A very common change, for example, would be that a community contributor has already made a change in the upstream GitLab CE project, for example, and their change added a new feature, or changed some setting that was reflected in the upstream's GitLab YML file, but now that needs to be reflected in the package that we ship in order for users to actually be able to configure it from their Omnibus config file and make it permeate through into the GitLab YML to actually impact the application. So we often see contributions of that sort here in Omnibus where we need to expose a configuration that's been added to GitLab. So the user would come in here basically looking. So because it's configuration, it exists in the cookbooks, and it exists in this running on the file system on the installed node area of the code rather than the compiled config section of the code. And so you would look for it in here, and typically you would start by just looking for that configuration file. So in the case of the GitLab project, it'll be under, these are all the cookbooks. It'll be under the GitLab cookbook. And then there's basically this list of templates. And here we'd be able to find the GitLab YML template file, essentially. And we can see it's a regular GitLab configuration file with templating for the various settings. So the contributor would often find where their setting needs to go, add it in here, and then kind of look at the settings around it to kind of figure out what to search for in the rest of this application to kind of find where to set it. So the other places that it would need to be set to actually populate, if you're adding something here, and you need to actually populate its variable, where that would need to be set. They would start searching for where an existing one is set, but I don't need to search, obviously. So it's still within this GitLab directory. It would be within attributes. This is kind of a Chefism. So if you're familiar with Chef, this sort of format would be common or expected to you, that you'd be able to find those same settings under, in this case, the GitLab Rails section. You would have found the existing one, added in your own. So I think we were on the upload storage path, for example. You'd add in your own here, set whatever its default is, would exist here. And that would enable users to add it to their GitLab RB, overwrite it, and make it through. In the case of Rails, that's all that would need to happen. Of course, there's actually the magic of how this gets pulled into that template file. So normally people would also take a look at that. So that actually happens in a recipe. So the recipes are actually what do a lot of the work. So in the GitLab Rails recipe, because that's where we're adding this piece of code, we would be able to find that GitLab configuration file. And we would see that it's being passed all these variables. So it actually gets passed all of the GitLab Rails variables plus a bunch more. So we don't actually have to do anything here, because if we had added it to the GitLab Rails, it would just get passed through. And that's essentially all you would need to do a simple configuration change like that, or a simple addition, plus of course add tests and all that other stuff that we'll cover in the contribution docs and the definition of done, for example. But that's kind of a quick start. The same thing would apply for, like, if you wanted a slight tweak to the Nginx configuration. It would be the exact same thing, basically. you would look for that nginx config file. We have, an nginx config file specific for the virtual host for the GitLab application, or just the general one. And you'd be making that change, setting that variable, and then looking in the attributes file based on the other variables for the nginx section, and you would see they're all here, and you would add it in here, and then you would also go check its recipe to see how these permeate through, to see if there's anything additional you need to set. But for the most part, for a simple setting, there probably isn't. And that's kind of the quick glance at adding a super simple change. So I'm just going to jump back out and take a look at if you're interested in contributing. Obviously, if you have some chef knowledge already, it's a little bit easier to get into the cookbook section. If you are just making a change, like we were just saying, you don't necessarily need Omnibus knowledge. Chef knowledge is a plus, but unless you're actually adding new pieces of software to the Omnibus, not a whole lot of Omnibus knowledge is required. Obviously, if you are making a contribution there, then a little bit of Omnibus knowledge is required, but it's a fairly simple project. Basically, you just have to learn the software DSL for what commands to run to build the software. But just to take a look at our contributing documentation, so on the root of the folder, we have a contributing doc where you can learn a lot more. And if we also link here to our developer documentation, which will walk you through setting up a development environment, writing tests, our merge request guidelines, for example. And then the part I really want to show you is there's quite a bit more documentation revolving around, for example, adding a new service to Omnibus GitLab that goes into a lot more depth if you're actually adding a new service, like a running piece of a running server on it, say like Prometheus or something like that, though Prometheus is already added. But yeah, so, and also we link to our architecture document. So this goes in a lot more in depth into everything I covered, the cookbooks, the default attributes, the recipes, the definitions, templates, everything basically. So this, if you're actually interested in contributing, I highly recommend reading this document. And then we actually, at the top here, right under the image, we have a link to a more deep dive tutorial on YouTube that's about 40 minutes long that covers all this and tries to explain it. So I'm just going to jump back to the contributing documentation and say, as far as what we're looking for contributions, so under the I want to contribute section, we've linked to our issue list. And basically, if there's an issue, if there's issues that both have the accepting merge request and the force scheduling labels, that means that not only are we willing to accept merge requests from the community for them, but we've also, one of the team has looked at it and said, like, this is something we actually actively want and would eventually want to put in ourselves, but we're looking for help. So you can just take a look, and if you're interested, grab one and start working on it. That's all I had. If there's any questions.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, DJ. I have a few, and I'm going to look at YouTube live stream as well to see if there are any questions. And I mean, the other thing I've actually noticed was that for when I started, I only started at GitLab like 5 months ago. I've been focused pretty much on Community Edition, and what I noticed was that there are over like 100 merge MRs from the community, I believe, for Omnibus. So I was pretty impressed with the number of activities that's been going on. And then I think there are like 4 or 5 like open community MRs that people are working on as well. So I think that's been going on for a while. But and yeah, and thanks for pointing out where to find issues that people can work on. But I mean, do you have a sense as to what, like, where the community members are contributing most? Is it mostly like in the config directory that you mentioned, or is it pretty much in different areas of Omnibus?
The primary location where we see contributor contributions is in those cookbooks and settings. Okay. Often it'll be for the Omnibus is kind of the first point of contact for someone trying to install and set up GitLab. So any issues they ran into, we'll often see improvements. Probably the most common contribution we get is doc improvements. Right. Because the Omnibus, of course, being so visible first step. But configuration, a lot of kind of edge cases with obviously how you configure, for example, your LDAP servers and other stuff, or SMTP, end up coming through here first. And there's a lot of different configurations for that. So we see a lot of contributions for people's specific issues that they ran into on very specific platforms that we can constantly improve and make better, and just kind of like generally make the software better. Cool. This is also one of the in terms of we not only get merge requests, but we also get a lot of issues in this project because it's also like I said, it's one of the first in terms of during an upgrade. Or during someone upgrading GitLab, it's kind of the first thing they run into. So any issues with GitLab or with the new version will often, if it's not something to do with the UI, but actually the upgrade experience, we'll often see it come through here first, and then that starts to increase the contribution level as well. Cool. The fact that the issues are also being created here.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, if people, I mean, you notice that. I mean, you noted earlier that. I mean, people can look at issues with accepting merge requests and a label, but obviously, if people have new issues they want to work on, they could open an issue and start working on them as well. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, I'm looking at the live stream. I don't think I see any questions there. I'm going to give it 20 more seconds in case there are questions coming in. Yeah, I think we're good. I mean, obviously the recording will be posted, and for people who aren't able to join the session, people can ping either me or DJ with any questions as either on Omnibus or how to get started in terms of contributing. So please feel free to ping either one of us with questions. And thanks again, DJ, for getting up early in the British Columbia, early in the morning for us, but appreciate your time. So.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day.